Hello, my friends, and welcome to a very special presentation called Is It in the Brain? Today, we're going to be talking with a renowned expert, Ashok Gupta. He has helped thousands and thousands of people and practitioners service their clients in a profoundly shifting way, using our mind, using our bodies to shift our perspective on health. And today, we're going to be discussing very powerful tools that you can use to do the same for your clients as well. So without further ado, Ashok, thank you for joining us today. I know how busy your schedule is, and I'm really excited to dive into this. Ashok actually came and spoke to our mentorship community a few months ago, and it was really enlightening. And the results that they're producing for clients are quite profound. And we're hoping that we can shine some light on his work and also the work that you can do for your clients to help them improve their physical outcomes with all-cause mortality. So thank you again for being here, and thanks for all the work that you're doing in the world.
Yes, thank you, Sachin, for inviting me to be speaking to your group, and welcome to all of you who are here. So very excited to be here and jump in and talk about the work we're doing, and obviously answer people's questions as well, for sure.
Absolutely. So I'd love for you to share before we jump in to the presentation, like what are you most excited about right now? What about the work that you're doing excites you the most?
Well, interestingly, something we're just launching this week is exciting me the most, and it's come at a very fortuitous time, given I'm speaking to all of you. Is We realize that a lot of practitioners, they're working, in very difficult circumstances with very challenging clients. So there'll be some clients where you have a certain protocol, the supplements, the medication, the lifestyle changes, and we get great profound shifts in their health. And there are some patients for whom, you know, you try so many different protocols and it just doesn't seem to quite kick in, or they have another stress in their lives and all the symptoms come back and you're trying new protocols. And that's often because we believe this nervous system regulation and brain retraining piece is so key as part of really truly living that vision of integrative health and
Mm.
integrative healthcare. So we've launched this new idea of the Gupta Program Concierge Service, where we actually bring almost like a white label, not quite. We bring that service into your clinic. So if you feel this is an important piece and you don't have the resources or the knowledge to present that to your clients, you can now have that within your clinic as an adjunct, as an additional piece to your protocols. And that's what we're introducing this week. So that's probably what's exciting me the most is we can, for functional integrative doctors, nutritionists, naturopaths, everyone can actually integrate this into their programs and make it a lot easier to facilitate long-term change. So that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I actually did a podcast. I don't know if you know a gentleman named Martin Hart, but I did an interview with him just the other day. And he mentioned he uses your program in his intensive programs where he's helping individuals overcome very, debilitating chronic health issues. And so I love that. I love hearing your name being dropped in amazing clinical protocols that are being utilized all over the world. And I love that this is now being made available to us practitioners who see the value of this work but may not have the capabilities of implementing it. Now you're bringing it into our offices, making it even easier for us to tackle what I think is probably the final frontier. Perhaps, I mean, I'm sure there's more beyond that, but certainly a frontier in medicine that is now getting a lot more attention thanks to the work that you're doing, Joe Dispenza is doing, and other people who are kind of navigating this uncharted water, so to speak, and realizing how important our mental faculties are in the healing journey. And I remember it was probably 20 years ago I heard somebody say this, and they said that the greatest discovery of the 21st century will be the power of the human mind. And the work that you're doing is fulfilling that prophecy. So it's amazing. It's amazing how powerful the mind is and how instantaneously people's health and hope can shift when they have the right mindset and when we identify some of those things that are holding us back, and especially with the trauma that we've all experienced over the last 4 years or so. And it seems like it's just like been an onslaught of noise and and fire and brimstone and all kinds of stuff over the last few years. And I don't see it ending anytime soon. So we just have to learn how to become more resilient ourselves first as practitioners, and then offer that to our clients as well, teaching them how to become more resilient in the face of everything that's coming at us these days.
Yes, I think so. And you know, traditional medicine has been based on this reductionist model. Yeah. And I
Mm,
think this is what we're beginning to shift and change over the last 10 years or so, especially that somehow when there is illness in the body, if we can boil it down to the smallest aspect of it at a biomedical level and fix the smallest level at the molecular level, then that will cascade upstream and fix the whole organism. So a lot of modern medicine is based on that principle. And yet that principle may work for certain conditions, but these modern illnesses that we are seeing time and time again, I would say these aren't hardware issues, they're software issues. The
mm.
hardware itself is just responding to the software. And therefore, traditional drugs aren't necessarily going to be able to tackle this type of issues in the nervous system, in the immune system. Rather, the programming of the system, the software of the system needs to shift and change. And that's where the neuroplasticity holds so much hope and promise for a lot of these modern conditions. And what excites us is we are finding out that so many practitioners are using our program for conditions we never expected them to use it for, and getting reversals of certain conditions. So as an example, we have a few experts in MS who are now reversing MS using the brain retraining and the neuroplasticity, which makes sense because that's also, as a result of the immune system over responding. We're finding people who are treating Alzheimer's, early onset Alzheimer's, are using our program with that.
Mm.
And then mold and Lyme and various other conditions. So it's spreading in terms of the number of conditions that neuroplasticity actually works for. And that's what really excites me is, could this be, as you say, a new frontier of medicine, a new exciting branch of medicine that expands? So when you go to your doctor and you complain of anxiety or chronic fatigue or pain or mold illness, the first thing they give you is a package of absolutely supplements and medications, but also the brain retraining, that we hit people earlier along their journey. Because what we found was that a lot of practitioners, they were recommending our program at the end of the client journey. So they would try all the supplements and the medications and the lifestyle changes and various other things. And there would be an up and down journey, but only once they'd exhausted all possibilities would they then recommend, well, perhaps you need some brain retraining. And actually, we want to bring that earlier into the system so that patients can be helped earlier. And the feedback that we get from practitioners is we get better patient outcomes, quicker results when we combine them both. And that, I think, is super exciting, that we can now bring this earlier into the journey.
Yeah, and the sooner the better, I would say, right? You don't want to ignore that from the very beginning. You want to acknowledge it and recognize that, hey, this is something that's potentially contributing to what's going on. Let's start tackling it. So let's just jump right in. I know you've got a wonderful presentation for us, and I really want to highlight and showcase how you help practitioners help their clients, and how us practitioners who are tuned in can also benefit from this wonderful knowledge as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the starting point is my own journey. So I myself suffered from ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, in the mid-90s. And in those days, these conditions weren't really recognized. And so I had some kind of virus. I was studying as an undergrad at Cambridge, and it just flattened me. And the virus seemed to go, but I became more and more and more exhausted, to the point at which I had to crawl to the bathroom. I couldn't focus on a screen. I couldn't focus on a book even. And it was like a brick wall. And I would go from doctor to doctor, and they would say, we don't know what you have. We don't know what causes it. We don't really know what to call it. And by the way, you might have this forever. Goodbye. And that was my lowest point. I was almost suicidal, thinking, I can't live like this. Like, people often ask, like, what does it feel like? And I say, it's like your worst day of flu times 5. Like, you're just flattened. There's nothing that you can actually do. And that started my lifelong quest to understand these conditions. And I made a contract with the universe. And I said, if I can just get myself, even if it's 50% better, ideally 90, 100% better, I will dedicate the rest of my life to helping others with these types of mysterious illnesses, because millions of people are suffering around the world and it isn't being paid attention to by the mainstream medical community. And I managed to research brain neurology, physiology, and I came up with a hypothesis as to what I thought caused these conditions, which I published online in 1999 and was published in a journal in 2002. And I got myself well in an ad hoc way, retraining my brain, and got myself 100% well, and then set up a clinic to treat others. So I spent about 10 years in one-on-one, really refining those techniques. And then we were the first brain retraining program to publish in 2007, a DVD program. And then since then, we've been publishing randomized controlled trials, clinical audits, and now we have an app. And of course, now we have this concierge service. So it's been a real journey over the last 30 years to make this more and more of a mainstream approach. So it's been, really fun from that perspective. And I've learned so much and I've expanded so much. So like many of us on this journey, something that we've all been through our challenges. And that's often why we come to this type of medicine, because we know that the traditional approaches didn't work. So that's my journey to getting to where I am now. And sorry, Sachin, did you want to ask anything, or do you want me to jump into what I was going to talk about?
Well, I guess I had one more question. And for those of you that are tuned in, feel free to type in any questions that you have in the chat, so Ashok and I can see them, and we'll be sure to answer them as best we can. So I'm curious, like, what resistance did you face when you were even postulating that this is in my brain, or it's something that I could, retrain my brain to get rid of? Were you like, I'm just curious, because that was like way ahead of its time. And
yes, we got a lot of pushback.
Yeah,
absolutely. Because you see, in those days, it was even more a reductionist philosophy. So it was like, this is a biomedical issue. We have to find that biomedical agent that is going to cure these patients. And maybe there's a hidden virus, and maybe this, and maybe that. And so the idea that you could retrain your brain meant patients felt we were saying it was in the mind. And so often they'd been ignored and told it was psychosomatic and all these different things. And we had to spend a lot of time helping people understand, we're not saying it's in the mind. These are real physical illnesses with real physical things we can test in the body, whether it's inflammatory markers or muscle tension. But we believe it's in the brain. So not in the mind, not psychological, but in the unconscious brain. And that's where is a meeting point of these different modalities. And if you go to a hospital these days, there's a separate psychology department over here, psychiatry is over here, physiology is over here, immunology is over here. That is not a model that's fit for purpose, because our brains and our bodies don't work like that. And the systems in our brain that they used to think were just responsible for our psychology and PTSD and our emotions, they now realize that exactly those same brain structures are responsible for our immune system and our nervous system. So the brain and the body don't differentiate between these different departments. It's one organism creating one defensive response that includes immunological, biological, emotional responses. And we have to treat the organism as a whole. And I think helping people understand that and dealing with the pushback has been taking decades to get here. But now there's less pushback, because a lot of the modern medical research is showing that actually this is to do with the brain. This is to do with the vagus nerve and how it responds to the body. The information flows back to the brain. The brain is this kind of the central point via which what's going on in the body is assessed and then responded to. And previously, the brain was a black box. So medicine focused on what we can measure, which is the physical body. But now we're opening up this black box and saying, aha, actually, this could prove that the root of many different conditions is in the brain, is in the way that the brain functions and responds. And that's what I'll go through in my presentation today.
Love it. I'm so excited. Thank you.
So I think the question I always like to start with, to really put all of this into perspective, like, what is brain retraining? Why are we doing this? Why do people get ill? Is to start with the biggest question of all: why are we here? Now, Sachin, I know you have a lot of kind of background in philosophical and spiritual thought as well, and that's another great conversation that we can have another time. But let's talk about it from a scientific perspective. We are here because this brain, this nervous system, this immune system, this body has evolved over millions of years, from plant life to single-cell organisms to invertebrates to vertebrates, reptiles, mammals, human beings. we contain that DNA lineage. And a fascinating fact I found out that we share 40% of the same DNA as a banana, right? So our DNA has learnt to survive and pass on our genes to the next generation, right? So we are survival machines. We adapt to our environment, survive, procreate, pass on our genes, and so on and so on. And that's why we are here. That fundamental process has driven human evolution. And if we take that as the first jigsaw piece, survival is the number one priority of your brain, essentially. And your brain cares more about your survival than it does your well-being. So that's a very important first step. And the second step of our understanding of these different conditions is that our threat detection systems and threat management systems are very delicate. Yeah. So normally our threat detection is to detect a threat. So that could be a virus, bacteria, physical injury, toxin. It detects those things, creates an appropriate immunological, physiological response, nervous system response to deal with that threat, and then has to come back to standby mode and go into the off position. And that is how we reach homeostasis or stay in homeostasis, is respond to threats appropriately and come back to balance. But in our modern world now, this brain and nervous system is responding to multiple threats. Yep. So the way we lived 200 or 300 years ago in small villages, farming communities, we're outdoors, we're eating organic food, we were living in communities and groups. Okay, we didn't have the best healthcare, but we had all of those things. And now, fast forward a few hundred years, we live inside. 94% of our time is spent indoors. We live in boxes. We eat food full of toxins. We eat water, drink water that's not necessarily good for us, etc., etc., etc. So our whole life has changed. And I've been in the US for a month or so, and I've been fascinated by watching US television compared to European television. It's really fascinating. You basically have 50% of the adverts, which are eat burgers, eat pizza, drink sugary drinks, eat all this stuff, right? And the other 50% of the adverts are for medications to help you deal with all that food that you've eaten, basically. So it's just so ironic that we've basically got people with sedentary lifestyles watching adverts to eat junk food, and then essentially watching adverts for all the medication they need to take to deal with all the bad lifestyle that they're enduring. And just thought that was really interesting as a kind of a summary of how we're living these days.
Yeah, even being in Canada and going to the US, the commercials are totally different. So it's like a stark contrast, and you can always tell like what ideas are being impregnated and what paradigms are being impregnated into people based on what shows up on their commercials, So it's quite fascinating to see how our brains are being programmed and conditioned to think a certain way, and specifically we're being conditioned to think that for a lot of things drugs are the solution, and chemicals are the solution for perhaps non-chemical problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And let's play a little game. I always like to play games to make our presentations much more fascinating than death by PowerPoint. So let's play a game. I want you to think, and this is to demonstrate neuroplasticity. I want you to think the first thing that comes into your head, think of a fast food restaurant. Okay. And now in your mind, think of a soft drink. Right. So let's see what people thought of. Let's see if I can read your mind with my psychic abilities. Okay, here we go. Bearing in mind this is a group of health professionals. Okay, so I'm going to guess that your fast food restaurant was McDonald's. So I don't know if we can have a little poll or raise your hands if you thought McDonald's. And then the soft drink. Oh, you did. Okay, so both of you did, who I can see. And then who thought Coca-Cola when you said soft drink? Okay. At least one person didn't, which is good. So maybe Whole Foods is the thing that comes to mind when we were dealing with health practitioners. But the interesting thing is that these companies spend hundreds of millions of dollars to train our brain that every time we think of food or drink, this is what pops up into our mind. Stimulus, interpretation, response. Stimulus is being hungry or thirsty. Interpretation, these are the foods I should reach for because they are good for me, or this is what I want in that time. The response, go and purchase that food. That's how it works. That's how neuroplasticity works, is training yourself through repetition to enact a particular emotional response, immunological response, behavioral response. And you can see that even these companies are using that idea of neuroplasticity. And then even why we get addicted to social media, it is because of the tiny little dopamine responses we get when we watch a little 1 minute reel or whatever. That's once again the brain saying, hey, I get little rewards every time I watch these videos on my phone. Therefore, that's good for me. Let me keep doing that. So it's once again taking advantage of neuroplasticity through the dopamine systems in our brain. So I think that the starting point there is really, as I said, we are living lifestyles not according to our genetic inheritance, which means that our threat system is now always threatened by lots of different things, toxins, emotions, stress, work stress, all these different things. So the system is on high alert for longer. And if I could just share now a couple of slides that describe what I'm talking about. So let's take some of the stresses or the precipitating factors for lots of modern diseases. And when I say modern diseases, we're going to be looking at, I guess, what we might call neuroimmune diseases. So we treat long COVID, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and then sensitivity reactions. So mold illness, food sensitivities, chemical sensitivities, and also Lyme disease. Then another area is pain and pain syndromes. And then a fourth area is autoimmune conditions. Yeah. So we believe that a lot of these conditions come under the title of neuroimmune conditioned syndromes, and I'll talk more about that later. But our hypothesis is that we may have a genetic disposition to these types of conditions. Secondly, there may be lifestyle, psychosocial, and environmental influences. So that might be obviously general lifestyle factors that we know impact on our general longevity and health and well-being. But the psychosocial aspect, we notice that a lot of people who get these neuroimmune conditions tend to have a background of trauma or chronic stress in their lives. Not always, but it's a risk factor. And finally, environmental influences. So how much are they exposed to physical toxins in their environment? And then thirdly, that acute traumatic assault or external stress. So that's where we then experience a virus, bacteria, toxin, mold, whatever it may be, that then precipitates that type of chronic condition. So those are those three precipitating factors that bring on a particular illness. And as I said, we were originally doing this for the conditions that we traditionally treated, like ME and chronic fatigue syndrome, but we realized that this model applies to potentially huge numbers of different conditions. I mean, we now have practitioners using this to support people with cancer and rehabilitation from cancer drugs, from benzo withdrawal, from vaccine injury. This model can fit a whole suite of different illnesses that people experience. Now, then what happens is normally when we have that traumatic assault, that physical impact on us, the body deals with that appropriately and then goes back to balance. But we had said that number one, the brain's priority is survival, and number two, we are under threat by so many different things that the system is overstimulated. And there's one core piece of brain neurology that really summarizes what happens next in the brain. And that is when the brain is hyperstimulated in terms of the nervous system and the threat response, it is prone to learning new sensitivities to otherwise meaningless events. Yeah. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, so let me give you a very simple analogy to help us understand this. And by the way, I did this for myself. I have a very simple way of looking at things, so I always have to use simple analogies to help me get my head around this very kind of complex neurology. And that is, let's imagine there's a rabbit in a field, and the rabbit suddenly sees a fox, and the fox chases the rabbit. So the rabbit is now in an extreme state of trauma as it's being chased. And in that field, there were bluebells in that field. And the rabbit's brain noticed that. And then a second time, it went into a field that had bluebells and suddenly was chased by a fox. Now, what do you think that rabbit's brain is going to do? In that experience of extreme pressure, it's going to think, every time I go into a field with bluebells, there's going to be a fox. So do we see? The bluebells are irrelevant, but the brain has made a defensive decision that that is what's going to help me survive. Yeah. So the brain can err on the side of caution because the brain cares more about your survival than it does your well-being. And in a lot of these illnesses, what is the core issue? Overstimulation of the nervous system and the immune system to hyper-defend the body. Now, Let me then describe this next diagram, and then we'll use an analogy to help understand what happens. So we believe that at number 4, there is a maladaptation in the neuroimmune system, specifically in the amygdala and insula parts of the brain at number 4. What that means is the brain suddenly gets conditioned to hyper-defend against otherwise meaningless events or pointless events that are not related to the original trauma at number 3. So at number 4, the brain then chronically arouses the sympathetic nervous system. We get immune dysfunction. We get abnormalities in the HPA axis. So that's the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, which some people interpret as adrenal fatigue. But we believe it's not so much adrenal fatigue, but a downgrading of that HPA axis. And then oxidative stress and a whole bunch of other mediating systems, which then at number 6 cause a lot of these symptoms we see across a range of common diseases. So these diseases are all like branches of a tree that come into a trunk. The diseases all look very different, but there's a common trunk and common roots. So we see the common symptoms, the cognitive difficulties, muscle dysfunction, sleep, autonomic dysfunction, post-exertional malaise, so difficulty in doing activities, and so many other symptoms that we see. And at number 7, we see secondary illness cycles. So the adrenals, the mitochondrial dysfunction. So a lot of people focusing on mitochondria function and cell danger responses and thinking that's the way that we need to fix this. Now, once again, it can help to support the mitochondria, but the mitochondria are getting a signal from the brain through the nervous system that we are in danger and therefore elicit your cell danger response. That is the right response. And therefore, the mitochondria are only responding to the signals that they are getting. So once again, this is an example of us trying to just focus on the downstream effects and somehow cure it upstream. But we need to go back upstream and have a complementary approach. There can be latent virus and bacterial reactivations that we often see, opportunistic infections, allergies and sensitivities at number 7. And normally the system would come back to balance. But as we said, remember, our threat detection system malfunctions. And now the symptoms themselves, and this is the secret, the symptoms themselves at number 8 become chronically detected in the thalamus, the amygdala, the insula, as indications that we are still under threat. And they loop back at number 9 to the brain. And the brain says, oh gosh, I think I'm still in danger. Quick, stimulate the sympathetics, stimulate the immune response, which creates the symptoms, which creates then a detection of those symptoms or something that represents number 3, the original acute traumatic assault, which then loops back to the hypersensitive brain and around we go. So something that started off as acute has now become chronic because the inputs and the outputs of the system have now got linked together. Yeah. So this is a dramatic moment in the brain, and this helps us understand why so many conditions then become chronic. And then what happens is at number 5, normally our response to stress, we have an element of resilience, but now that stress system is no longer resilient. It is hyper aroused. It's on a hair trigger. So any small stresses in our lives are enough to trigger number 5. And neurons that fire together wire together. So we may see this in our clients, that what now happens is they have some little stress in their lives, but that isn't just a normal thing, bit of anxiety, heart rate rises, muscle tension, but they start getting immune responses, inflammatory responses, gut dysbiosis. That's because now the defensive system has got confused and wired itself together. And therefore, any emotional stress is now causing immune system responses and inflammatory responses, causing the dysbiosis, the tightening of the gut, and all the challenges that come from that. And all of you as practitioners will know that then there's that gut-brain axis where the gut then sends information back to the brain to say that something's wrong, we're in danger. And that fuels the brain even more. So that's another vicious cycle, the gut-brain axis, which is pretty much exactly the same as this, that fuels then that vicious response and that chronic response. And we can do some fantastic work at the number 6. So we can help the body deal with this sympathetic arousal and immune dysfunction. We can help the body deal with those secondary illness cycles. There's supplements, there's dietary changes, there's medications, there's lifestyle things that can certainly help at that stage. And the vision that I'd like to have of truly integrative healthcare is, in addition, let's also deal with what's happening at number 4, that maladaptive response in the brain. And if we do that hand in hand, we're breaking the loop in this cycle at two places, which, as I said, we generally find works much better for those chronically ill patients. And you can see even how this model applies to MS. So some recent research is showing that even with MS, a lot of patients, or certainly there's a link with Epstein-Barr virus, that for people who've been exposed to Epstein-Barr in a particular period of time, they have a high likelihood of then going on to have MS. And what they've noticed is that some of the viral signatures in EBV are very similar to the signatures of the myelin sheath in some of the neurons. So we can see that that defensive system, that immune system, mistakes our myelin sheath for the Epstein-Barr virus and starts attacking the myelin sheath, which then goes on to causing this maladaptive neuroimmune response. And can we reverse that? Can we train the brain out of that type of response? And if we could, how fascinating and promising that could be for so many autoimmune and neuroimmune conditions. Yeah. And one way to, an analogy that many of my patients find very useful to help us understand this is, imagine, I think Sachin, we talked about this last time, imagine you are King Sachin of your kingdom.
Mhm.
That's a nice ring to it. King Sachin. Sounds like a big Raj in India, doesn't it? So you are King Sachin of your kingdom and your castle. And you have an army, which is your nervous system. And you have a navy, which is your immune system, to defend the kingdom against threats. And imagine all of a sudden there's a drought in that kingdom. This drought now means that your kingdom is weaker, your castle is weaker, your army is weaker, your navy is weaker. Now, in comes an invading army over the hill. That could be a virus, bacteria, pain, toxin. Yeah, a threat comes over the hill. Now, normally your army and navy can deal with them effectively, but they're compromised now. So they work doubly hard to defend the kingdom. They fire off their arrows and their weapons of war and their cannons to defend the kingdom. And they have to work harder to do that. So we know that many people who have chronic illness, at the beginning, they recognize that it took them a lot longer to fight off the initial insult, or perhaps they never fought it off. So they keep firing off their weapons of war for longer, which creates also that prolonged period of post-viral fatigue. And they fight it off, but the army and navy are traumatized by that experience because they think, I fought it off, but maybe they're still hiding in the jungle or the forest. So now the army and navy are still galvanized and are still responding. And they come to their weekly meeting with King Sachin and they say, King Sachin, we still need all the resources of the kingdom. We need the metal, the corn, the clean drinking water. Everything should be channeled to the army and navy because we are in defense mode. We're at DEFCON 1. Is it DEFCON 5 or DEFCON 1? I can't remember which is the highest one in the US, but I think it's DEFCON 1. So we're on DEFCON 1. We've got to be super careful here. So now what's happening is that the army and navy are firing off their weapons of war unnecessarily just to err on the side of caution. And guess what? Some of those arrows and those cannonballs are landing back inside the kingdom. That's where you start getting inflammatory effects, autoimmune effects, where that defensive system is now compromising the body itself. And what also happens is, as you're in this defensive state, detoxification systems are compromised, especially if you have that genetic marker for that. So our detox starts not working so well. So now opportunistic spies, now this is where the analogy really extends, but imagine there's no funding for the Secret Service. So opportunistic spies and infections start proliferating. So it might be EBV, it might be other types of bacteria and viruses start flourishing. So now the whole kingdom is in this imbalanced state. There's not enough detoxification. There's compromise of the immune system and nervous system, which can't effectively deal with opportunistic infections. Is in higher inflammatory markers. There's gut dysbiosis, and the army and navy keep firing off their weapons of war. And as far as you're concerned, King Sachin, you're saying, well, I've got to go on the advice of my generals. So let's keep defending because those invaders might be around. And you can see how now that becomes a lack of homeostasis. So as far as the brain is concerned, that's the new level of homeostasis because that is the level of balance we need to potentially deal with these ongoing threats. And the brain retraining is in that next weekly meeting you have with your army and navy generals. They say, King Sachin, we need all the resources. And you say, my dear generals, you've done a wonderful job of defending the kingdom. but the war is over. You can stand down. Yeah. And it reminds me of an incredible analogy. Can you guess when the last soldier was taken off duty at the end of the Second World War? Can you guess what year that would be? Would you say what, 1946, 1950? When do you think the last soldier was taken off war standing?
Oh, I don't know. In the 50s, 60s?
50s? That's what you kind of guessed. It was 1975. 30 years later, there were Japanese soldiers based in an island in the Pacific that were still defending their kingdom 30 years later. And everyone had told them the war is over, right? This is what's happened. And they didn't believe it. They thought it was a trick. And they kept defending this island. And it was only when their senior generals, I don't know why it took them 30 years, but their senior generals went to that island and said, it's over. The war is over. You can stand down. Did they finally get the message? And that is what neuroplasticity is about, that you are retraining a survival mechanism in the brain, right? And therefore, that's not an easy thing to do. But through neuroplasticity, through repetition, we can train the brain that we are no longer in danger. And by the way, this doesn't use any invasive techniques, no devices. It's not even CBT. It's a unique type of brain retraining tools and techniques. It trains the brain that we are safe. We can switch and dampen down these systems and bring our system back to balance. And that is the promise of neuroplasticity with these conditions. And of course, if somebody is taking some fantastic supplements and diet changes and lifestyle changes in our circular diagram, sometimes that can be enough by itself to heal the practitioner. We've all had clients like that where that's been enough, yeah, and they've got back to balance. Because if we've dealt with this down here at the bottom of the diagram, the whole cycle then calms down. But in a lot of patients, either stress comes and the whole system starts again and we try new protocols, or indeed the diets and the supplementation, the medications and support are not enough. And actually, we need to go deeper into the brain to be able to confidently say we've removed this old conditioning of the system. So, wow. Okay, so I've thrown a lot at you guys there, and there's a lot there to go through. So before I go through the next stage, perhaps we just see, Sachin, if you or anyone else has got any specific questions about the hypothesis before we move on to, well, how do we deal with this?
Yeah, there was a couple of questions that came in. I just want to make sure we address them. So one is from Kat. She says, please explain the physiological pathways the body and brain take for this to happen, and how do you decide on your hypothesis? I think you kind of covered that a little bit. But if you want to add anything, then Rachel also says, I'm so excited and grateful for this offering. I feel like this is the information I've been seeking and navigating towards my whole life. Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. And then Irene is saying, thank you for this amazing information. Are there books, studies, or resources you recommend to expand our learning? Which I think you're going to be sharing a little bit more about as we get into this more. So great question, yeah. Irene.
Absolutely, yes. Now I'll share some resources about how people can find out more about this. And the truth is that it's not to be, self-congratulatory, but it's pretty much the papers that we've written which kind of go through this in detail. There aren't many other resources out there that will go through this, but I will share some of those. So in terms of the first question people ask about the specific pathways, so we know that the insular and the amygdala parts of the brain, although we've identified those structures, they aren't the only structures involved, of course, but we believe that's where the conditioning lies. And when I keep using the word conditioning, I mean the neurological learning, the LTP, the long-term potentiation. So that's where the new neuronal pathways are being created in those brain structures, and that's where it's stored. But of course, the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate, all of these different brain structures work together in coordination, the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, to create these defensive responses. And then those responses feed generally through the hypothalamus, which are that kind of master gland that then controls our physiology. And most people have been focusing on the hypothalamus, but the hypothalamus is just a servant of the rest of the brain. It is not where the core conditioning lies. And so the hypothalamus then links to the brainstem, and then, of course, all those downstream effects through the nervous system, that information flow goes through our nerves into the body. And when it's parasympathetic, it obviously goes through the vagus nerve. Yeah. And then in terms of the reverse way, our body is constantly sending information back to the brain. And once again, one of those major pathways is the vagus nerve. which is taking in all the incoming information, once again, putting it through the brainstem and connecting directly to the amygdala, the limbic system part of the brain, and then the insula. And those brain structures assess all that information and then create the appropriate response. And there's a couple of medical studies I'd love to share with people that have been so fascinating, that blow my mind, because I geek out on this stuff. Is 25 years ago, or probably actually I'd say about 17 years ago, we were the first to hypothesize that perhaps it is the amygdala and insula where the core conditioning lies, and that for us was a hypothesis. And a few recent studies have now confirmed this. So some older studies showed that in animals, when they gave rats an immunosuppressant, the immune systems of these rats got subdued. And they did it in combination with sweet water. So sweet water plus an immunosuppressant then created immunosuppression. That's what we understand. And they repeated that a few times, and then they brought the rats back to baseline. Then they gave those rats sweet water by itself. And guess what? The rat's immune system came down just with sweet water. And when they analyzed the brain, the conditioning happened as a result of the amygdala and the insula, and was stored in the insula. So the immune response was stored in the insula. And then recently, some amazing study by Dr. Asia Rolls and her team. About 2 years ago, this was published. The first time anyone on the planet, as far as we know, has actually demonstrated and be able to recreate immune responses in the insula. So they took rats and they created an irritant in the gut, which created inflammatory bowel disease, so an inflammatory response in the gut, which we see a lot in our clients. And they measured the electrical signature in the insular part of the brain, brought the rats back to baseline, and then they re-stimulated that electrical signature in the insula. That's all they did. And guess what? They were able to recreate exactly the same inflammatory bowel disease response in the gut of these rats without any external irritant. It was just that electrical signature in the insula. And what's fascinating about this is it helps us understand that there may well be a whole host of peripheral immune responses that are going on in the body downstream. But we are intelligent beings, intelligent systems. All of that information gets fed back to the insula for it to store that approach, so that next time we encounter it, the brain is even more efficient in being able to respond. And so if people want the specific pathways, that's one of the pathways that they have now discovered in the core conditioning in the insular part of the brain. And that's why we call our treatment amygdala and insular retraining, because we believe that those two brain structures are where the core conditioning has unfortunately happened and need to be retrained. Yeah.
I had a question for you. How much of this conditioning is potentiated in childhood, or like before we can even pre-verbal traumas or incidences? I'm curious. I don't know if you have any data on that, but just your thoughts on that would be great.
Yeah, so there is some data on this which shows, and obviously I was cautious about this data because then people think, oh no, because I've had the background of trauma, I'm going to get ill, right? But we know from studies that people who have a background of trauma are twice as likely to have some kind of chronic disease later in life, unfortunately. But once again, our genes are not our destiny. Our childhood is not our destiny, right? We can reverse and change that. But essentially, in our hypothesis, we certainly see that I'd say 70, 80, 90% of our patients have had some kind of background of trauma in childhood, whether it's a lack of nurture at one level of the scale, right through to full-blown trauma, which may involve some kind of abuse. And in our hypothesis, what we say is that this starts in the womb. So how stressed the mother is will impact on the factory setting of the amygdala at birth. Then secondly, the birth experience itself can impact on the amygdala. Then the first 5 years of life are incredibly important. So pre-verbal and verbal. Does that child feel safe? Does it feel nurtured and looked after? And if it doesn't, for whatever reason, then it may create more what we call threat detection responses, and threat detection management becomes a priority in the brain. Because if it doesn't survive those first few years, if it doesn't have support from people, then it cannot survive on its own. Whereas an infant who gets to about 7 or 8 years old can now survive on its own in general, maybe not in a wild place, but certainly within a tribe, can survive by itself without its parents. And therefore, those first 7 or 8 years of life are where the the sands of our brain are most soft and we can create new learning experiences. And therefore, those become our factory setting of the amygdala and probably the insula as well, in terms of how much we respond and are sensitive to our environments. Yeah. And so a lot of our work is saying, just because you had a background of trauma, it doesn't mean you have to remove the trauma in order to physically heal. The physical illness is essentially a layer over the top, and your background of trauma has essentially heightened the risk factors for conditioning in the amygdala and the insula, but it is not the causal factor. So once people heal from the illness, we also have lots of practitioners who can then support them through their trauma as well. We have specialists in that area. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I'll move on to some of the other things that I wanted to talk about, which is really helping us understand, well, what do we do about this particular conditioning? And what I want to do is also, before I do that, just talk briefly about the brain-gut axis, because I know that that's something which a lot of you have knowledge about. So just with this diagram, we always have the gut-brain interaction as well. So there are feedback loops where in that stress response, we have a weakening of the immune system, we have cortisol excesses, which can cause leaky gut, secretions, biofilm, gut mobility is compromised, obviously dysbiosis, so good and bad bacteria balances, and we also treat SIBO as well, and fluctuating sugar levels and detox systems shutting down. And all of that feeds back to the brain to say we're in danger, and around we go in this chronic cycle. And there's a huge amount of brain neurology around that. Don't worry, I'm not going to spend the next half an hour explaining this diagram. But as I say, there's a huge amount of complexity behind what we're talking about, and we're creating simplistic models from it. And this is one of the models that we use as well, in terms of the different brain structures and how they work. And I think one of the most important things is that if someone's been through a background of trauma, their inhibition systems get compromised. So the prefrontal cortex acts as an inhibitor on all the signals coming into the brain. That's that red arrow at the right-hand side. And then also our amygdala and insula have inhibition responses, but they are also compromised. And that may be because in childhood, they didn't have to inhibit systems so much because we had so much threat. Yeah. And so this is what I've already been through in terms of the evidence supporting this. So there's quite a few brain imaging studies that have shown that there's abnormalities in some of these brain structures. And this is some of the data I talked about. And that's the soldier. That's the soldier who was taken off duty in 1975 by his Japanese leaders. So it's a very poignant picture, I think. Yeah. So looking at this cycle, how do we break this cycle? And so we have this particular brain retraining program, which essentially is something we've developed, as I said, over the last 20 to 30 years, which is training a patient to recognize the danger signals. Now, we can't directly impact our immune system, yeah, but there are indirect ways in which we can. And let me give you an example of this, right? Now, imagine if I said to you, I could shift your physiology right now, even if you know that I'm not touching you, I'm not in the same room as you, but I could shift your physiology against your will. Would you believe me? Be like, no, there's no way that you can do that. Okay, let's have a go at that. So imagine now, I'd like you to imagine that I have a slice of lemon. Okay, it's a very tangy lemon, this one. And I'm placing this very sour slice of lemon on your tongue. But it's just resting there. You haven't bitten into it just yet. Oh, it's a very sour lemon. Can you feel it? Oh, it's very tangy. And now you bite into it. And those sour juices go through your mouth and your saliva starts getting stimulated. You just feel that really tangy, sharp, lemony taste. All right. So who's got some saliva in their mouth right now? Some excess saliva. Oh, perhaps it hasn't worked. Okay, you have got it. Okay, good. So isn't that interesting that I was able to trigger a physiological response in your body, even though you knew it wasn't real, and you may have decided, let me see if I can stop myself from having that reaction. Yeah. Now, I find that fascinating. So that's an example of how we can shift our physiology. Now, imagine if we start taking these keys and saying, could we use these similar processes to actually dampen down the immune system? Yeah. Wouldn't that be fascinating? Yeah. If we could find the right key to do that. And I'm not saying we found the absolute key, but I'm just saying we're continually researching and trying to figure this out. So we're constant students in this journey. And in some of the processes that we have, we train a patient to recognize those danger signals when their brain is saying, aha, we now must trigger the immune system. Remember, we said neurons that wire together, fire together. So the nervous system and the immune system have got locked together. How can we pull them apart, untangle them? And that's what we do with these specialist training techniques. And we have a big 7-step floor chart that people put on the floor, and they learn to recognize danger signals and immune signals, go through this 7-step process, and through neuroplasticity, retrain their brain. So that's what we are doing. And there's that technique. We use somatic retraining techniques, etc. And there are 3 core components of the Gupta program. So the first is, and they all start with R. And the first is relaxing the nervous system, or regulating the nervous system. And we imagine that healing is like a dove. All right, it's got 2 main wings. The first wing is regulating the nervous system, and that is allowing our brain to become more neuroplastic. Because if we have a brain which is not neuroplastic and is stressed out, then we can't move to the second stage, which is retraining the brain. So imagine your brain is like a field, okay? And there's a river flowing through that field, which is the stimulus interpretation response model. So the stimulus is signals in my body. The interpretation is we're in danger. Maybe the original insult is still in the body. The response is trigger the immune system. So that's your stimulus interpretation response river that's flowing through the field. And we've got to redirect that river. But guess what? That field is frozen. The ground is frozen. It's not neuroplastic because of the stress of that response. So the first R of the program is regulating that nervous system. So we use breath work, meditation, somatic techniques, visualization, whatever works for a patient. We help them bring down that overstimulation. And that unfreezes the ground. So now the ground's a bit looser. The second wing of the dove is retraining the brain. That's a really bad looking dove there. You can just see the visual there. So the second R is retraining the brain, which is, now that the ground is softer, let's dig another channel, a new stimulus interpretation response model on the right-hand path. So we're digging that new channel. And the water of that river is now being diverted, right? But it requires consistency because the brain goes back to its default survival mechanism. So if you suddenly get stressed and you aren't digging the right-hand channel, guess what? The water goes down the left-hand channel again, which is why repetition is so important. Till eventually the left-hand path is covered over and the new right-hand path is there. Yeah? And that is essentially how the relaxation of the nervous system and the brain retraining work in tandem to support each other and create that new pathway. And the tail feathers of the dove are what we call re-engaging with joy. And what that means is that in order for someone to get well and stay well, they need to understand their stress patterns and their stress responses and connect to that natural inner joy within them. So the third R of the program is, let's teach patients to recognize their own stress patterns. We use parts coaching. We use a whole host of different techniques that we find most powerful to help people recognize those signals and be able to indulge in self-care and not allow their achiever to overtake them and push their bodies too hard, because they have sensitive nervous systems. That's why they got this type of condition in the first place. So that's the third R of the program. And all 3 work in tandem to be able to support longer term health. Yeah, so that's how our program works. And very briefly, I'd like to just share some of the clinical studies that we've enacted and some of the results of that. Let me just share this particular slide here. So our priority is not for this to just be, hey, just go on believing us. No, this has to have objective science behind it. So getting the RCTs is supremely important for us. So this is a timeline of the different studies that we've done, and this is on our research page, which is guptaprogram.com/research, which I can put into the chat as well. So that particular page is where you'll see all of these studies and the original papers. And so in 2002 is when I published the hypothesis. We did a clinical audit in 2010, which found that 92% of our patients improved and 2/3 of patients reached an 80 to 100% full functioning within a year. Then we conducted a randomized control trial, a small one in 2012, which showed significant improvements compared to a control. And then I'll talk about these latter two studies, which are the two main randomized control trials that we did. So in 2020, we published on fibromyalgia. This was published in the Journal of Clinical Medicine, so a very prestigious journal. And it found that after 8 weeks with patients with fibromyalgia, we compared Gupta program with a relaxation intervention, so structurally equivalent. In the Gupta program, there's 40% reduction, close to 40% reduction in fibromyalgia scores and 0% in the control group. A 50% increase in perceived health, halving of pain, halving of depression, and halving of anxiety. And that was after 8 weeks. And we generally say our program is a minimum 3 to 6 month program. And then on long COVID, this was an independent randomized controlled trial. And after 12 weeks, we compared our program to a wellness program. So we want to compare apples and apples. So this was another program which had diet and supplements and sleep and activity and lots of great stuff. So it was structurally equivalent. And after 12 weeks, the Gupta program was 4 times more effective at reducing fatigue and exhaustion, and twice as effective at increasing the levels of energy, and 97% increase in energy levels. So once again, this is a published study that you can read on our website. In fact, what I'll do is I'll just bring up that particular page because someone asked about how can I find out more about this? And I think it would be good for people to be able to actually see what this research page is like in case you'd like to read the raw research. So let me just bring that up for you.
Sure. And as you're doing that, Ashok, a question that came up is, can this methodology help with OCD? And follow-up from me is, can it also help with addiction?
Yes, and this is where we are getting anecdotal reports. So we can't prove it, but OCD for sure. OCD is, once again, it's a similar thing. It's a defensive reaction. It's a protective reaction to ensure survival. It's just this is an inappropriate response. And so we've had patients use it for OCD and overcome that. We've also had people use it for treatment conditions that they've been unable to treat before. So things like anorexia, smoking addictions, drug addictions, people have been able to use it for that. So treatment resistant conditions, definitely this is something that can help. Because remember, this brain retraining approach, it's agnostic. It doesn't care what you use it for. It just says, what do you want to shift and change? And if you can shift a survival response, then you can shift many other things. So this is our research page, which is guptaprogram.com/research. And on this page, you'll see all our timeline of published research studies. And one we've just published that we're very excited about. This one wasn't a randomized controlled trial, but was a clinical audit on hundreds of our patients. And what it found that was across 14 different conditions, so there's 16 here, but across 14 different conditions, the program was statistically significant at improving health. So you can see those numbers there in terms of the percentage improvement in health. So long COVID, IBS, Lyme disease, pain. And this was after 3 months of using the program. And this was before we had the app and before we had the daily events, which I'll talk about, the daily Gupta size, which has really rocketed up people's responses. But you can see MCAS, so mast cell activation. I'm sure you see patients with MCAS, with mold, with long COVID, food sensitivities, and SIBO. We can definitely now, with our new approaches, get those stats up as well. So you can see, once again, these are different diseases with different branches, but we're realizing they have the same trunk and the same roots. And this is, I think, the first time someone's been able to show consistent improvement across a range of different conditions. Once again, that was an independent audit of our patients that was conducted recently. And then you can see the long COVID study, and you can read the medical paper. Then you have the fibro study, which was in the Journal of Clinical Medicine. You can read that, and so on, so on. So there's all our different studies on this particular page. All right. And we have some new randomized controlled trials in the pipeline for various conditions. And our aim is to get phase 2 and phase 3 trials. That is our aim. And we actually have a 501c3 compliant fund, a chronic conditions research fund in the US, which we're using that as a not-for-profit fundraiser for clinical trials. So a request from me is, if you have any suggestions on who we can approach for funds, grant organizations, people interested in brain retraining that might be interested in these studies. We need to raise around $500,000 to get some of these studies going. As you know, getting the studies started in this area is very hard, and getting funding for it's very hard. So any way that people we could approach, or people who might donate, high net worth individuals who might be interested in this, please do get in touch with us, because as you know, that's an ongoing challenge for many of us in this area. And in terms of how the program is delivered, so as we said, it's an app and also a member area on the website. So people can use the website, they can use the app, whatever works for them, use them both. And people can download the app, and there's lots of free resources, and then they can take on our full program. And our full program at the moment costs $499 for patients. And within that, they get 1 year of support. So they get the 15 video sessions and audios, so about 30 different audios. They get weekly webinars with myself. They get a package they receive in the post, so a manual and a floor chart in the post. And they also get what we feel is the game changer in neuroplasticity, daily brain retraining. So as we know, I recently presented at a conference, and I said, many of us think we are in the health industry, but actually we're in the habit formation industry. Because our clients, we know how hard it is to make sure they are taking their supplements, they're taking their medications, or making sure that they are engaging the lifestyle changes that we've suggested. Yeah, and habit formation is the hardest thing. And therefore, similarly with neuroplasticity, how can we get people to enact and repeat these exercises to support their health? And something which has been a game changer is daily Gupta size. So we also offer daily Zoom calls with our team, with our experienced coaches, that take them through daily nervous system regulation and brain retraining. And patients don't have to attend every day, but it has been the game changer. Where it took months and months for people to heal, people are finding accelerated change, because that repetition is so important. And we have about 200 patients a day coming online. And what they say is, hey, I feel motivated because I see my friends on there and I feel a sense of community. And my different coaches are taking people through different exercises each day. So there's variety, so they're not getting bored. And most importantly, and this is where we get a bit woo-woo, when you have 200 people in a room meditating together or doing somatic work together with that joint intention of healing, people's experiences are much deeper and more profound. And whatever the explanation for that is, it's very, very powerful. And that has been the game changer. And that's all included within that price. So it's crazy to me, the value that we give to patients of weekly sessions, daily sessions, a whole app, whole infrastructure, forums, all of that for that price. But we kept it deliberately low because we know patients don't have a lot of resources and time and energy for this type of thing. So that's how it's delivered. And until we get phase 2 and phase 3 trial data, we offer a 1 year money back guarantee on the entire treatment. So if people don't have improvement, they can return it. And Sachin, as I mentioned before, a lot of practitioners have wanted to recommend our program and already are, so IFM doctors and various people. And they had a difficulty with it, which was sometimes when a patient comes to you as a clinician, you want to have that holistic approach already integrated, and you want to feel like you're giving your patients the best experience. But if you say to your patients, hey, by the way, go and do this other thing over there, the Gupta program, and go and purchase it yourself and whatever, it's fine, but it sometimes can feel a little tricky because you're not offering the treatment directly. So we racked our brains for many months to think, how can we support practitioners in bringing this important piece of healing upstream back into their clinic, so it feels like you're delivering this piece as part of your protocol. So the first method is just a normal affiliate program where practitioners can just recommend it and get a commission on it, a 20% commission, so $100 if your patient purchases it. But the other thing we've come up with is a concierge service, and I'd just like to share with people how this works and how people can actually integrate this. So this particular page is guptaprogram.com/concierge, and it's all explained here. And the way we've targeted this is seamlessly integrate nervous system regulation and brain retraining directly into your practice. So the way it works is, and we're offering it free for the moment, is we create your own branded patient portal with your logo, your image, your welcome message on our app. Yeah, so it's still the Gupta Program app, But we set this up for you for free. We give you a link to give to your patients. So here's a fake clinic called the Fiona Hamilton Clinic, right? The Hamilton Medical Clinic. So you can have your imagery or whatever. And we create that area for yourself on our app. And normally that's $500 to create that, but we do that for free. And you then get a unique link for your patients to say, hey, we are now offering nervous system regulation and brain retraining. Click this link and join it. Your patients click that link, they join the Gupta program, and the first page they come to is your personalized branded page. And that's right at the top of the app, so they always see it. And it says, welcome, we've partnered with the Gupta program to provide this important piece of your healing. And within that patient area, your private area, you can have your welcome letter, explain to them how to use the program and how it fits with your medications and supplements. You can see the members in there and you can choose for them to see each other or not. You can host resources. So you can have your own videos and audios there if you want to. You don't have to. You don't have to have that tab. You can have events. So let's say you want to check in with them every 3 months to see how they're getting on with their nervous system regulation. You can organize dedicated events for your patients in there. Totally optional. You can even have a chat function where they can chat amongst each other or you can chat with them to see how they're getting on. And you can also see each of the patients and see which level of the program have they graduated to. Have they done level 1, level 2, level 3? You can see what was the last video they watched. So you can see whether they're actually engaging with the program or not. Yeah. And you can be as hands-off as you want. You can just literally have them in our program, or you can actually communicate with them in our app because you become the host for this particular area. And we're also going to be offering quarterly training on how to support your patients with this. Yeah. And the way that works is that normally it's $499, but you get billed just $399 for your patients, but obviously you can bill them the full amount at $499 or even more if you're going to give them more support within this branded area. You may choose to charge them more for that. And so this is something that we set up, and literally onboarding takes 5 minutes. So on this diagram, this form on the right-hand side, you simply fill in all your details and you provide your headshot, your logo, and your banner, and then we create this private members area for you. And the only criteria we have is that within 1 year, you have at least one patient that you recommend to the program. So at least we can bill you for one patient to cover our costs for setting all of this up. And of course, we hope that you would have more, but that's the minimum requirement for this. And yeah, it's just a way of bringing this into your clinic so it becomes part of your protocols, and it's simply being powered by us, just like you might work with labs that power some of the tests, or you might work with different medications. You're just essentially in charge of the patient's health, and you have providers that come in that support you with that. So that's the page there, and I'll just put the URL into the chat there if you want to join this particular thing. So it's guptaprogram.com/concierge. And we also give health practitioners free access. So if you want free access to the program, if you're a practicing clinician and you want to have your own experience of it, you can click on guptaprogram.com/health, fill in the form there, and there you will receive free access, free 1-year access to the Gupta program to have your own experiences and see if this is right for your clients.
Amazing. Very generous of you. That's what I love about the work that you're doing, is you're making it available and accessible to as many people as possible. Starting with practitioners, I think it's important for us to be patient zero in our process so that we can appreciate the work and then endorse it and recommend it wholeheartedly. So I'm curious about, and I'm sure people have some questions about the concierge program. It sounds like it's pretty easy to set that up. And it almost to me sounds like a licensing model. Would that be accurate in terms of how to describe it?
Yeah, it's a bit of a hybrid model because we couldn't completely white label what we're doing because obviously it's my face in the videos, and of course we have the daily events and things. But yeah, it's kind of a licensing. It's not quite a licensing model. What it is a pay-per-view service essentially. So you bring this into your clinic, you tell your patients about it, they download the Gupta Program app, but gets sent straight to your private member area and then use the app as normal. So it's a bit of a hybrid model, but it's on a pay-per-view service. So if you have only 5 patients you recommend it to, and only the ones who actively enroll are the ones that you would be charged for.
So then are we, so I guess the model is that we would charge them and then you would charge us, correct?
Exactly right. So it would still feel part of your protocol. So if you have packages, you can just include it within those packages and increase the price of the packages to incorporate that. But at the same time, if you want the patient to pay, we still have the normal affiliate model as well, where you just send your patients, they purchase it, and you receive $100 commission. So either the patient pays and you get $100, or in the concierge model, you charge your patients $500 or whatever you want to, and then you are charged $400 for each patient that enrolls. And of course, if you then say to your patients, hey, I'm going to be doing a webinar with you every 3 months to see how you're getting on with nervous system regulation, and I'm going to give you extra resources about my views on this, then of course you can charge them more because you're giving them more support in this arena. So we want you to feel as practitioners that you own this. You are supporting them with nervous system and brain retraining, and
Hmm.
you're giving them those resources, and we're just providing our expertise as part of that.
Amazing. What I'm curious as to what inspired this model because I mean, it sounds amazing. So I'm curious as to where the inspiration came from.
You know, it was Coming to America. No, not the film, but actually just spending a lot of time in the US. And I think in the US is a different model to Europe, although there's obviously functional integrative doctors there as well. But we're much more advanced here in the US. And I was speaking to a lot of clinicians, and they say, yes, we do recommend your program, but we don't know enough about it. Or actually, we do it right at the end once we can't find anything else that's working. And is there a way that we can bring this into our treatment protocols, that we can own the customer journey? And then I realized, of course, this is the missing piece. I want everyone to come out of this looking good, which is you as a practitioner, the patient has come to you for this integrative approach. So you want to feel as though you're delivering the full solution. And when we cracked that and I started talking to practitioners about this model, they said, yes, this is what we want. This is how it could work much better for us, for our clients, and for you. And that's where then this idea was born. And now we're putting this into practice. So right now, if people fill in the concierge form, we're going to be launching this in a few weeks' time. So just bear with us as we get this ready for September, for when obviously people see a lot more clients. Holiday season is over. So once you put in that form in a few weeks, you'll have your private members area. You'll be sent a link to be a host. And I said, the only condition is that you just send one client per year.
Amazing. Amazing. So we've dropped the link in the chat and you can go there and set up your own uh, uh, private labeled, if you will, a co-branded portal. And if you want to experience the program for yourself, which is obviously a great starting point for many of you if you're new to this work, the links are also there as well. It's guptaprogram.com/health. And please don't share these links outside of this room, just to honor Ashok's offering to us. And of course, the health offering is only for healthcare practitioners versus patients. So don't share that link with your patients or clients, if you will. I'd love to, perhaps open up the floor to any questions that people might have. So if you've got some questions that are unanswered, then this is a great time to ask those questions. You can raise your digital hand or you can post them in the chat. And as those questions are coming in, Ashok, I'd love for you to share perhaps like a great case study or a kind of a story of a client who's gone through this program to kind of illustrate the benefits of it and the outcomes that it can achieve.
Yes. So there's obviously hundreds. You'll see on our success stories page, there's about 400 or 500 success stories on there. But my favorite that I always tell is the one from a gentleman in New Zealand who found our program many years ago. And he had the full suite of conditions. So he had fibromyalgia, he had mold, he had dysbiosis, he had Lyme, he had opportunistic infections galore. I mean, he was really affected. And he was 84 years old, right? So it's very difficult at that age just to be able to have an effectively functioning immune system, never mind all of those different things. And he took the program, and within 3 months, he'd got himself up to an 80% recovery. And that was amazing. It blew my mind because I thought if an 84-year-old can do this and have the neuroplasticity to do this, we can all do this.
Mm.
And I said to him, what are you going to do now? I mean, you've had these illnesses for 30 years. You've, not been able to live a full life. What are you going to do now? And I thought he was going to say, well, I'm just going to make sure I enjoy my retirement and all this. And he said, Ashok, I'm going to travel the world. I'm going to do all the things that I've wanted to do over the last 30 years that I haven't been able to do because I'm liberated. I can now do these things. And that was such a heartwarming story. And it brought tears to my eyes. I thought, this is a man who is so grateful for having his life back that he's not going to waste any further moments now. He's going to enjoy his life, he's going to live it to the max.
Mm.
And we've had patients for whom it's a whole spectrum. We have patients sometimes with long COVID who heal within weeks. Within a couple of weeks, they're back to 80, 90%. And yet, we'll be honest, we have patients who it takes at least 6 months before they start noticing improvements. There's a whole spectrum. And therefore, we always say to our clients, don't set a specific timeline for yourself. Just keep going with the program until you see the results, because each of us is unique. Each of our brains is unique. If our brain thinks, hey, this is a survival response and I'm not letting go, and you've done this for 30 years, it's not instantly in a month going to let go of that survival response. It's going to take repetition again and again until it gets the message. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Beverly wants to know, you talked about COVID and the positive results in energy. How about symptoms like brain fog and foggy thinking, forgetfulness? Are those symptoms improving as well in the reports that you're seeing?
In that particular study, we only looked at fatigue and exhaustion, but anecdotally, yes, it's the whole spectrum of symptoms that people experience improve in tandem. And often, like we all see patients in clinic which have a whole suite of things. So they'll have the Lyme and they'll have the mold and they'll have the pain. And we generally find with this approach that all of them equally improve at the similar rate, which is interesting. So that kind of core branch, that core thing. Now, future studies, we've got studies on long COVID right now that not only are looking at the full suite of symptoms, but are also looking at inflammatory markers, heart rate variability, etc. So we've got objective markers as well as subjective markers. And when that study gets published, then we'll be able to show, hey, there's a whole spectrum of symptoms and physiology that we are impacting on, and that will be exciting to have that published.
Amazing. Another question coming in about, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this concept of sacred fluids. Can you share how sacred fluids produced within the body connect with your studies, specifically Amrita, Soma, cerebral spinal fluid, and Christ oil?
Yes, absolutely. So when we are healing, and this is where, we obviously are a brain retraining program that are operating within the constructs of science. At the same time, for long-term healing to occur, we have to treat the patient at many levels. So we treat at the physical level, but we're also treating at the emotional level, the mental level, the spiritual level, and the energetic level. And of course, each of us may have our own belief systems about which of those systems truly exist in health. But I think more and more of us are coming to the conclusion that there are many different levels of healing. So to answer your question, Rachel, in our program, we have approaches that, let's just say, are looking at healing at many different levels. And we know, for instance, with cerebrospinal fluid, that is disrupted in these conditions naturally because of many different dysfunctions that are occurring. And then for those interested in prana, there is lower prana and chi energy in these patients. They're very, very low prana. And therefore, raising the prana through the body, through these types of approaches and lifestyle changes, then as a secondary effect, impacts on these other fluids in the body. And so therefore, I think it's an integrative approach, which is super important. And we use somatic techniques as well to get people in tune with their body. So I could go deeper into that, but I think, yeah, that's as a kind of high level answer. Yeah, absolutely. These are things that we're aware of, but don't directly talk about. Yeah.
Okay. And then would you be able to navigate us through the app? Is that something that you can do a screen share on? We had a question.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I can even show you then where your private, how it works and how the co-branding works, because I think people would be interested in that as well. So this is the desktop version of the app. Of course, in the app itself, it's a different type of screen, but very similar. So this is the home page. So on the home page, you can see that people can navigate on their video sessions. But let me show you on the left-hand side. So on the left-hand side, You can see members and events. So these are all the different daily events we have. And then under main video sessions, you can see this example, Fiona Hamilton's medical clinic. Your patients will see your clinic at the top. They won't see anyone else's clinic because it's private, but they will see your clinic. So you're always featured at the top. That's where the co-branding comes in. So they can at any time click on Fiona Hamilton's medical clinic or Sachin Patel's clinic, and they will be able to have your welcome letter, your imagery, your branding. You'll be able to see the other members in there if you want that to happen. And you'll be able to see host your own resources. So how to use this area. You can host your own videos and documents and various things, host your own events and chat as well. So that's your private member area. And then the way it works is on the left-hand side, people follow those video sessions. So the welcome and introduction, the level 1, which is relaxing the nervous system. So they watch these videos, etc. And then we have audio exercises. So premium meditations, brain retraining exercises, parts exercises, stretching, etc. Okay, so that's the audio exercises section. And under events, we have daily Gupta side. So that's your healing meditation. So you can see here under healing meditation, these are all the events next week. So Monday, being with sensation. So that's a somatic technique. Tuesday, reclaiming the joy of movement. Wednesday, healing meditation. And these are followed by the brain retraining. And these occur each day at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern. Yeah. And then you have the healing retreat. We're actually doing a retreat in September in the US as well, which is going to be a lot of fun. And then we have community. So people can read success stories, join the forum, contact one of our coaches. So we have about 30 to 40 coaches around the world who are trained to support people with this. And we're going to be launching a practitioner training program as well soon. And we have a buddy program so patients can support each other as well. And we also have different languages. So we are translated into Italian, German, Spanish, Finnish as well. Okay. So yeah, that's a brief tour of our overall area. And something that people find really powerful is the welcome checklist, because there's a lot of information here. So on a welcome checklist, when someone first downloads the program, they will have a whole checklist, which is their guidance through the program. So it says, okay, watch your welcome video. Now download the app if you haven't already. Fill out your profile. And then these are the sessions to go through. And all of these are clickable. So they click these. And once they've completed, there's a little box here where they can tick completed. It doesn't show it for me because I'm the admin. But you can click complete and it takes you through each step of the way, all the different things you do for the 4 levels of the program. So super easy to navigate through the program as well.
Wonderful. A couple more questions, and then we'll have our closing remarks. So Beverly's asking, can this help with cognitive decline and dementia in older clients?
Yes. So interestingly, we just had a study which has been written up and will be published soon on cognitive decline in older adults and how the Gupta programs can support them. And it also looked at depression as well. And there was a marked improvement in people who took the Gupta program. So that is a study that will be published soon and is quite interesting. And so once again, I hate to always quote anecdotal cases, but yes, anecdotally, we've seen that, but we want to do the research and actually prove that. And as I said, there are doctors using it with Alzheimer's patients, and early onset Alzheimer's is being reversed using this approach. Now, of course, it's complex because they aren't just using this, they're using the diet and supplements approach as well. So we need to do proper studies to see what is doing what.
Another popular topic is, can this be helpful for pre-para and post-menopausal women?
Yes. So we don't specifically prescribe it for that. But of course, I would say most of our patients are older women, so women in their 50s and 60s, also their 40s as well, who are getting towards that kind of age and have found that having the program has supported them through that transition.
Amazing. I think we answered all the questions. And if people want, I mean, certainly I think the next step for people who want to dive deeper into this is to go to the links that we shared. So perhaps we could drop those again in the chat for everyone. And if somebody wanted to get in contact with you, like Priya's asking here, is the best way to just sign up first and then get in contact with you? What would be the steps to connect?
Sure. So so I'll just give a summary of how people can connect, because I think these are in here. So I'm just going to copy these. Oops, yeah, here we go. So step one, if people want to just sign up for themselves to have the program for themselves as a practicing clinician, the first link is the health link. So that's the one that gives them access for free to the program. And then if people want to join the concierge service and have their private member area, once again, that's a minimum 1 patient per year, then this is the link to the concierge service. And then finally, if people want to read our research, our published research, then I will put that link in there. It's /research, but this is the full URL. That's the link to our research page. So those are 3 links that I think are really useful. Now, if you'd like to get in touch in terms of research itself, we have a clinical research director who conducts all of our clinical research. So what I'm going to do is I'll put her email in the chat so that if you're involved or want to find out more about clinical research and how you can be involved, then this is her email. It's kelly@ccrfund.org. And CCR Fund is this independent research fund that we've set up. So you can email her there. And if you want to just email me and my team, this email goes to my executive assistant and she monitors my inbox. My email is ashok@guptaprogram.com. And that's where you can email me personally. Yeah.
Amazing.
So I think Priya was asking about, she's investigating hormone health and looking at collecting data. So yeah, definitely get in touch with Kelly and she can talk about any potential studies that could occur.
Awesome, man. Well, you've advanced leaps and bounds since our last conversation. So I'm excited to see what the future holds for your organization, the research that you're doing, and then also practitioners implementing it. Thank you for everything that you do. And what I love is that you make it very accessible and affordable because as all of us know, it's accessibility can become a challenge when we're working with clients. And to put a program like this together could take any one of us many, many decades, as it's taken you. And now you've been gracious enough to make it available to all of us. So wonderful dharmic work that you're doing, brother. Appreciate you. And thank you again for your time today. Is there anything you'd like to share with us in closing as we wrap up?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you to you, Sachin, bringing together all of these practitioners and supporting them in their work. I was impressed by the work that you're doing as well. So thank you for that and for this opportunity. And yeah, I'd just like to leave everyone with the thought that, look, we all know what it's like when we have these clients and it's just so challenging to try and get them back to health. And it can feel frustrating when we think, are we not doing the right thing? And, we feel that sometimes as well. And I truly believe that we are on a new path in medicine, that we can heal these patients that have these chronic conditions and we can get them back to health and feel that sense of satisfaction when that happens. And that this is going to become easier, I think, over time as we do more research and we see what's working for people. So I think the future is bright, the future for all of us practitioners, and you all do a fantastic job with, the interventions that you have. And we just hope that we can be a small part of that and support you with that.
Well, thank you again, my friend. And for all of you that are tuned in, or those of you that are watching the replay, check out the links, guptaprogram.com/concierge, /research published studies, and also health, if you're a healthcare practitioner, to set up your free account so you can experience the transformation for yourself and then endorse it and recommend it to your clients. Thank you all for attending live, and really appreciate Ashok for sharing this information, not only with our community, but with the world. So let's all give him and send him our love, appreciation, and gratitude. And I'm wishing all of you a wonderful, wonderful day ahead.
Right.
Have an awesome, awesome day. Thank you so, so much, everyone. And thank you, Ashok. Bye for now.